Hi everyone and welcome along to Sonic Academy with me, Chris. Today I am joined by a composer and a producer who's based in California who's written over, now get this, 45 albums, both in video game soundtracks and movie soundtracks. He's probably most known for writing the soundtrack to the smash hit game Fez, and last year, most recently, he did the soundtrack to one of 2015's best horror movies, It Follows. I'm really pleased to be joined by Disasterpeace, aka Richard Vreeland. Are you there, Richard? How are you?
I am. Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us on Sonic Academy today. You're joining us from your studio in LA, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I actually just moved here about 2 weeks ago from San Francisco.
Okay, well look, let's go back to those that probably, maybe not be aware of you. Give us a little sort of potted history of how we got to where we are today. How did you get started, both in music and how did you get started in making electronic soundtracks?
Yeah, so I grew up in New York City, and my stepfather was a music director at our church. So I grew up around music. Used to, sneak into the band practice and play drums and things like that. And a little later on, probably in high school, I started playing guitar and got into that, and slowly started writing music. I actually had a big sort of career change. I was going to school for design and decided to drop out to do music instead, and went to music school. Like I said, I kind of started with guitar, and at some point started to get frustrated fairly early on with just the level of competency I felt like I needed just to put out one track that sounded good. Mm-hmm. and so instead of going in for the long haul with that, I kind of stumbled into the world of 8-bit music and people creating music inspired by retro video game music, and found some, I was using GarageBand at the time. That was kind of my first tool, and using some really basic synthesizers, and I was still writing music on guitar, but I was I would track it onto my computer, and that allowed me to drop tracks really quickly.
And what year are we talking here? Is it early 2000s, late 90s, or what time frame are we in?
Yeah, so I'm 30, and I started recording music probably like 2004. Mm-hmm. So that's right around the same time I started doing 8-bit stuff.
And what attracted? I mean, obviously you've been surrounded by high-level compositional works, church music and choral pieces. What attracted you to the simplicity of the chiptune scene?
Well, just to clarify, I wasn't the kind of church music I was around was probably simpler than that. But okay. I think what attracted me to it, well, it was kind of a combination of just always playing games as a kid, and remembering that there were all these great games that I played that had really great music, going back to them, and kind of just realizing how informative they were for me, and also being a guitar player and being kind of obsessed with playing riffs. Like in high school, I was big into bands like Tool and Rage Against the Machine. So it was kind of where these two things intersected that I got my start making some pretty kind of proggy, fairly heavy, rock style 8-bit music.
And what was the moment that you thought, hold on a second, this electronic music I really am digging, let's ditch the guitars, so to speak, and let's pick up soft synths? Was there a pivotal moment there?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it actually came out of utility more than anything, because I still loved the sound of guitars, and that was my primary influence. And actually, it made me feel a bit like an outlier when I went to music school. I actually had to apply to the music synthesis program more than once, mm-hmm. and I felt like the first time around, they ask about influences and stuff, and I think they expect people to mention people like Stockhausen and Aphex Twin or whatever, mm-hmm. and all my influences were bands like King Crimson and Tool and Radiohead and stuff like that. So that was kind of where I was coming from as a teenager, and that was what informed a lot of the things I was doing with 8-bit stuff. So I wasn't really thinking about electronic music per se. That's kind of stuff that I discovered later and learned a lot about in school.
So what was the what's the first sort of synthesizer that you got and you started getting to grips with and went, hold on a second, this is kind of world of possibilities here? What was there one particular soft synth? Like I know you use Massive quite extensively. What synth that's kind of got you hooked?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, I was doing really basic stuff. I was using like the GarageBand like simple synth, like I think that's what it was literally called. But slowly, I started messing with more sophisticated synths. In the beginning, I was doing a little bit with Native Instruments stuff, like I had Pro 53 and FM7, but I didn't really know what I was doing. The first synthesizer, well, I should say that when I was at Berkeley, I took a class, a synthesis class, where we used the Nord modular G2 software. So that was like my first exposure to like signal flow stuff. But that was a demo. The first synth that I actually used in a lot of projects, and when I really started getting into routing and it's just kind of opened things up for me, and I was like, wow, I can do so much with this, was probably Thor in Reason, which I used for a couple of years. Yeah.
And am I right in saying, did you go to school with Matt Lang? Did you attend Berkeley with him? No.
I did, yeah. He, I believe he was he's a little older than I am, or he went a little before me, but our paths did cross a couple times. Okay.
Yeah. Is there a healthy scene then? You've just got to Berkeley. Is there a whole world of possibilities open up to you that you're really enthused about, or how did it feel in that time when you arrived at the school and all these sort of new technologies were exposed to you?
Yeah, it was really exciting. There's obviously a really strong sort of style that Berkeley sort of comes out of Berkeley and their curriculum and stuff, and so it's important if you go there to be strong-willed, so that you don't kind of become just steamrolled over with their ideas. But at the same token, there are a lot of really incredible artists there, both on staff and students, and so it was a really great environment to be in. Yeah.
So you finish up, you come out of college. What's next? What was your plan then? Were you an avid gamer and wanted to do games, or was it kind of happenstance that you get into it?
It was a little bit of both, and it actually started before I even went to. It started right around the time I went there. I kind of stumbled into my first gig. I saw like a wanted ad in an internet forum for music for cell phone games, and I responded to it. I'd been doing I'd been writing out my music in tablature software, so I had all this like general MIDI files, and this was like pre-smartphone era, so the soundtracks all called for MIDI file soundtracks. So I sent a bunch of those over, and they liked them, and that was kind of my first exposure to working on game soundtracks. But then in school as well, we had a club, a video game music club, where a bunch of students would get together, and we would go to like game developer events and stuff, and we'd work with staff to find out about internships. And so I did two internships when I was in college. I interned at MIT as an audio lead on a project, and I did a contract internship working on a Bomberman game. So these are kind of my first exposures to working in games.
Take me through. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not a particularly avid gamer, and the last time I had a games console, it was a Sega Mega Drive. So it was. I'll give you an idea how old I am. But what is the process of? I mean, I know game budgets, probably 2005, 2006. The music game budgets were getting as big as Hollywood. But you're kind of the antithesis of that. You were chiptune, very simple, hooky melodies, lots of atmosphere. What's the actual process of making a game? Well, I can understand the process of making a song. when you get a game, do you get to see it? Do you get to read a script or storyline, or what's the starting point?
Yeah, when I first started, I didn't really know about this stuff, so and I was working on somewhat larger, more corporate projects, and so in those cases, I was kind of out of the loop. You know, I'd be working with some kind of liaison who had a relationship with a game company, and they would basically outsource all the audio work. And so, basically, in the beginning, on some of the earliest projects I did, they would literally just send me like a picture of a level and be like, "Hey, write music for this." And that was a terrible way to work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they would actually put the wrong music to the wrong area of the game,
right, okay.
And I wouldn't find out until it came out. And so very early on, I was like, I can't, you know, this can't ever happen again. Like, I need to do what I can to avoid this. So I started working more with independent teams, with smaller people, smaller groups of people who were, you know, closer to their projects. And it wasn't about money. It was primarily just about, you know, about the game and about the art, and that allowed me to also have a bigger stake in the game and to have more creative freedom.
Okay, so you did initially then get sort of screenshots of levels, and then it develops into, again, do you get plot lines, or do you get actual visuals, videos, or do you get to play the game without any sound? How does that work? What's the next step then?
Yeah, so there.
Hello? Oh, no.
Sorry?
Oh, you froze there, but it's okay. You're back.
Oh, okay. Did you catch the audio at least?
Yeah, no, you cut out. So if you just restart that question.
Okay. Yeah, there are like a lot of different ways that you can, as a composer, you can engage with working on a game. Mm-hmm. For me, I want it to be as involved as possible, and so I frequently, you know, will have the same level of access as anyone else on the project, including the programmers. So, you know, I have access to the source code so that I can, you know, do audio implementation myself sometimes, or you know, or work with a programmer to create special tools to implement the music and to do interesting things with the music. One of the things about working on games that I like the best is the possibility space of music in games is very, very large, and before you even sit down and write music, there are all these other questions you can ask about, like, you know, what is even the form going to be like? You know, will this music be interactive? And those are things that, you know, don't always come up with something like film, and so it's a very collaborative process. It tends to be much more like technical, and so it scratches like different parts of my brain.
I was going to ask primarily about that, because that's the area that really fascinates me, in that you write this linear piece in Logic that can be put into a non-linear world.
Yeah.
How do you start formulating ideas for manipulating that audio so it becomes an experience, and as a player moves around the game, it interacts with the audio? How does all that start?
Yeah, I mean, so the most like basic thing you can do is write a linear piece of music and just loop it in a game. But that's fairly traditional and simple, and nowadays a lot of people are doing much more sophisticated things. And over the years, I've tried to experiment a lot with form in music, a form of music in games. And so doing things like, you know, writing a piece of music that's built out of multiple layers, that will change depending on context, whether that's you know, emotional state or position, like where the player is in the game, or like what's going on, like, you know, are we in a high intensity moment or a low intensity moment, and, you know, let's have the same general piece of music, but let's kind of branch in a different direction.
Okay. Can I boil this down just for my own sanity? So can I describe it? Is it stems, really? So you would have stems of pads and strings where it's kind of an emotional piece. Once the intensity increases, would you bring a stem of drums and toms in and sort of ratchet up the tension? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's one of the most straightforward things that you can do that would be somewhat dynamic, is to do that. But obviously the sky is the limit. Like we did in Fez, there's an area of that game that's a graveyard, and there's a thunderstorm, And so the music is made up of these chord hits followed by this these arpeggiated notes that kind of sound like rain, and the distance and time between one chord hit and the next is random, and so it's kind of like an aleatoric piece of music in some respects that is designed to mimic the surprise of like thunder in a thunderstorm.
Okay, cool. Let's move on.
So that's one example.
Let's move on and talk about Fez. I mean, was that the big breakout sort of hit for you and the developers? I was reading a bit about it today, and it's a difficult birth of a game. Were you caught up in all that sort of the difficult birth of the game?
I kind of came in a little bit after that, but I was aware of the project. It had been in development for a while, and there was a lot of hype behind it. I was playing some shows in the Northeast. I was in Montreal, and met the programmer for the game there, and they wanted to do a compilation soundtrack, and I was trying to like convince him to hire me to just do the whole thing, and that's what ended up happening.
And is that something you actively chase? You kind of read about this new game, it's getting lots of interest and stuff, and you go, well, look, this is something I want to do. Would you go after and try and sort of find the developer and chase them down and talk to them?
Yeah, I mean, at that stage of my career, I was definitely looking for opportunities. That was a game that had a composer, and so I wasn't really, trying to seek that one out, but it just kind of worked out that way.
Cool. And how do you feel after that? When Fez comes out and it's a big hit and it's across all platforms. I think it made top 50 games of 2013 in several magazines, and even top 20 in PlayStation mags and things like that. Does that get you a lot of interest, and does that cement you now as a games soundtrack designer?
In some respects, I think so, just because the amount of publicity that game had was so much more than anything else I'd ever done, and so it's hard to argue that it wasn't like the most important thing I ever did for my career. Pretty much since then, I haven't had to look for work, and so there's been like a snowball effect, and It Follows came directly out of working on Fez, and that also kind of snowballed for me.
Let's move on to chatting about It Follows. So that was this the first movie score? So the director is, sorry, what's his name again? David Robert Mitchum. So he was a fan of the game Fez and sort of sought you out and said, look, I want this soundtrack for my movie. Is this a daunting task for you? Is this like, or is this, no, this is where I'm meant to be?
It's different. I had done some short films before, so I was familiar with and cutscenes in games, so I had a basic, familiarity with scoring for linear media. I was looking forward to the opportunity, and I thought it would be fun and different, and I actually thought it wouldn't be as stressful in some respects. But what ended up happening is our timeline got reduced very dramatically. We were supposed to have half a year to score it, and then we only had 3 weeks to get into Cannes Film Festival. So it was a pretty stressful project.
Listen to the soundtrack, and I've been listening to it over the last few days and stuff. The title, I don't know, I hope you don't mind me saying this, it sounds to me like classic Depeche Mode, late 80s. It's just, which is, they're my heroes, and that is my sort of
cool
period. I love them. Is that a big influence? Is that something that I've kind of got right or wrong?
I mean, I've certainly listened to my fair share of Depeche Mode, but I think when I was writing that, so a lot of the pieces in It Follows were the temp score for that film. The director, David, he used a lot of music from Fez, actually, which posed a very unusual problem for me because I had to outperform myself with new pieces of music, and I think some of them were successful and others maybe not as much, but the title track is actually directly inspired by the track Death from Fez, so it has a similar sort of harmonic progression, and then I was kind of riffing on it at the piano, and I tend to, when I go back and listen to it, I definitely hear more of like almost like a Morricone sort of influence there. Yeah. But
the riff, it grabs you. It's instant. It is so suddenly hooky. It's amazing. Do you up your software palette then when you go from the games where it's limited budget, now you've got kind of bigger budget and it's a big movie? Does it all feel different when you're creating for the movie?
Well, that's the funny thing. The budget was smaller than most games I work on.
Wow.
It was very small. I mean, but yeah, I mean, my intention there was to work with more live musicians and instruments, and that's generally where budget comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
But It Follows, you know, I did the entire score with soft synths and Logic, so in 3 weeks. So I mean, that's about as shoestring as you can imagine.
and what soft synths then? What are the go-to? What, as soon as you open a project, what's the first things that you open up?
Well, I mean, the last couple of projects, it's definitely been massive.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to, you know, looking forward, I'm trying to do more different stuff. I've been doing more stuff with samples, more like granular stuff, and making my own patches with samples. But massive.
What are you using for the granular stuff? Are you using Camel or sorry, not Camel? I should know this. Logic's
Alchemy.
Alchemy, that's the one. Alchemy.
I haven't gotten into that one yet. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the interface.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. You know, I think there's so much to it. It is reverb also plays a big part, or atmosphere, kind of space, sense of space plays a big part in your music. What reverbs do you really rate and really like, and what inspires you?
I really like to try to use reverb as a texture, as opposed to a space, and so a lot of that has to do with the way you spatialize the reverb, and then the way that you put effects over it. And so a lot of the stuff on like It Follows, you know, I'd use reverb in massive. I almost use it like an envelope, just as a way to kind of like do different things to a sound, and then by grouping things together and then putting, you know, like different kinds of distortion and saturation and noise on top of that, you could kind of like glue things together to create different sorts of sounds and instruments.
I watched the video on YouTube. You're a big fan of bit crushing and stuff on
Fez.
Fez, yeah, that was it was a big sort of sound. Is that still something, or you moved into tape saturation, or is there some sort of effect plugins that you kind of informs your sound?
I mean, I try to keep it fresh and use different effects every time I do a project. So, you know, Fez was a lot of bit crushing and tape warp, like slow LFO, pitch modulation. I mean, It Follows doesn't have a lot of that. It Follows is a lot of distortion, a lot of tape saturation. And then I just did a game called Hyperlight Drifter, where I kind of didn't change things too much in that respect, but it's more different compositionally. So yeah, I mean, I definitely I'm always looking for new effects and new things that I can do. And, you know, with each project, I want to create like a rule set for myself to keep myself focused and inspired to do new stuff.
When you say a rule set, is it a sonic palette? Do you go, I'm only allowed to use this type of reverb, this distortion, this saturation, sort of give yourself 10 plugins and then work with it within that frame? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's not so rigid. It's just kind of a guideline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's your secret weapon? Tell us some plugins that, you know, we mightn't have thought, you know, this is used in this, and I think you use WoW plugin. Is there any site plant you use that? I mean, does anybody know how the hell that works, or do you know how it works?
Kind of. I think I understand how that works.
Right.
I haven't used it a whole lot. I've used it a little bit here and there. I used it a little bit on Fez and a little bit on Hyperlight Drifter. I just love that you can manipulate every note individually, and that's kind of the main draw for me. But secret weapon, I mean, I would probably say on It Follows and Hyperlight Drifter, it was Satin by Yui.
Yeah.
Which has a beautiful sound. And I was going to say something else, but I don't remember. Oh, there's a plugin called BitSpeak, which is like a early 80s, like I forget what. There's like a special kind of algorithm that sounds like Speak and Spell.
Yeah. I've had a demo of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd often use that as like a as like a secondary modulation of a sound, and then I'd like put it way in the background or do something to it as like just a weird sort of like kind of thing. And so I was always looking for like things to do like that.
And so I suppose the other thing, if anybody goes and checks out one of your 45 album, we talked off air whether it was 30, 45, you think you're nearly up to 50 albums, be it from video soundtracks to movie soundtracks. Your sound is completely in vogue at the moment with the smash hit Stranger Things. And you actually turned down Stranger Things, is that correct?
I did, yeah.
Can you tell everybody why you thought, why you didn't think that was right fit for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to me that when I'm taking on a new project, that it's going to be different for me, and it's going to push me in the right direction. And so at this stage of my career, I didn't see myself doing something that was so overtly 80s. I think a lot of people equate It Follows with 80s, but I don't. Like, I never was really I mean, I was inspired by Goblin a little bit, but I wasn't thinking about 80s as an aesthetic at all. I'm very sensitive to like being pigeonholed, and also I read the script and I liked it, but I saw one of their features and I wasn't sure how I felt about it, and so I want to work on projects that I get really excited about, and I'm glad that people love it. That's great. But I'll have a lot of other projects coming up that I'm really excited about, and I can only do so many things. So,
and are you uncomfortable with now it becoming such a big Vogue sound, and you're kind of in that area, and do you find that sensitivity, or are you fine with it? You just like, sure, whatever?
I think I go back and forth. Sometimes I get frustrated because I feel like people very quickly put a bunch of stuff into the same category, and so sometimes I feel misunderstood in that respect.
Pretty much what I'm doing right now.
It's okay. Yeah. I mean, but I try not to take it too seriously, because I feel like once I make something and it's out there, it doesn't really belong to me anymore. It belongs to everybody. So, and however they want to feel about it is fine.
And let's talk about future projects, or what you can talk about future projects. You've another movie coming up, is that correct? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm working with David Robert Mitchell on another film. It's called Under the Silver Lake, and it is not a horror movie.
Okay.
And starring Andrew Garfield, who plays Spider-Man in a few movies recently.
Okay.
Can't talk a whole lot about it beyond that. I don't think.
You never can talk about these things. It's always really difficult because people are going, I don't know what I can say and what I can't say. What about games? You're also working on another game soundtrack, is that correct?
Yeah, so finished this big game called Hyperlight Drifter not too long ago, and so I actually moved to LA to work on their next project, and I'm excited about that because it's going to be a chance for me to do different things. I have a lot of plans to explore music as something that isn't just like on top of a project like Underscore, but like it's like something that's all around you, and so you like move through a world and there's like just music everywhere, and getting into some nerdy stuff like creating procedural spatialized music craziness.
Well, you'll have to come back another time and talk to us a bit about that, because that just went over my head. So do you perform live? Is that something you'd like to sort of do? Getting all this music out to a live audience.
I've actually done quite a bit of it. I've done some touring. I played as Disasterpeace for about 8 years, half on my own and half with a drummer, and that was all me playing guitar. And at some point I felt like it wasn't really fulfilling me anymore. I took it for about a year. I was doing piano stuff, like solo piano and vocals, and that was pretty cool. But again, for me, it's just like I have a lot of things I want to do, and so it's always a matter of prioritizing, and like live performance has never been my favorite thing to do. I'm not sure I like it very much. I know that other people do. So yeah, I've just been trying to focus on what makes me happy.
And so you still got the bug. You still can quite happily go into the studio and knock out album after album. You don't ever really suffer from writer's block, do you, or just a seize up of the creative juices? That it's always continually flowing.
No. No, I definitely get writer's block, and sometimes I get emotional block. Like after Hyperlight Drifter, I worked on for a couple years, and that was pretty taxing emotionally. I really pushed myself to with the music, and didn't always hit the mark. I'm happy with it, but it didn't always, wasn't able to accomplish everything I wanted to. And then after that, I was like, I need to maybe take a little break, and so I haven't written as much music since then. But I'm slowly getting back into it.
Well, Rich, look, thank you so much for joining us here today on Sonic Academy. It's been a real fascinating insight into the world, a world that sadly I don't know a huge amount about is the games world. I know a little bit about the movie soundtrack worlds, so it's kind of really interesting to pick your brains and sort of get underneath the process and let our audience here, just see what actually is involved in making game soundtracks and indeed movie soundtracks. Thank you very much for joining us at Sonic Academy.
My pleasure.
Guys, I hope you all got something from that, and I would like to thank Richard again for joining us, and we'll see you all very, very soon.